Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty startling report about a shadow unit that was operating right at the top of the U.S. government. It's a story about a massive data breach, a ton of unchecked power, and a secret plan to completely remake the federal workforce from the inside.
So let's just get right to it. What in the world was the Department of Government Efficiency, or the DOGE initiative? That's the big question we're going to unpack today. The source material really paints a wild picture here. You've got a shadow unit, basically staffed by tech insiders. This unit becomes the spark for a massive data breach, and underneath it all, there's this grand plan to fundamentally change how the U.S. government works. So where does a story like this even begin?
Well, our story starts with a security failure. But this wasn't a breach from some outside hacker. This came from within, right at the very top of the federal government's own HR department.
The target was the Office of Personnel Management, OPM for short. Now, you got to understand, this is basically the human resources department for the entire U.S. government. It has all the sensitive personal data for millions of federal employees. So getting access to OPM isn't just like getting the keys to the building, it's like getting the keys to every single person's life inside that building.
The first real red flag was this deeply flawed data migration to the cloud. A security analyst who looked into it described the whole thing as rushed, sloppy, and likely engineered by a small team outside the agency. Yeah, this was definitely not your standard IT upgrade.
But here's the twist. The report we're looking at argues this wasn't just incompetence, it was strategic. The sloppiness, it seems, was actually a feature, not a bug. It was designed to create a system where servers and data could just be, well, deleted, wiped clean, making it super easy to dodge future accountability from things like Freedom of Information Act requests.
So how did investigators even start to piece this whole puzzle together? Well, it all began with the first digital clues that showed something was terribly, terribly wrong.
The scale of this failure was just catastrophic. Investigators found critical infrastructure just sitting out there exposed on the public internet. We're talking control panels, personal workstations, high-level administrative tools, even the main HR email servers. Stuff that should have been behind layers and layers of security was left completely wide open.
So the technical what was obvious, but the why, that came from a really unexpected source, an operative from the hacktivist collective Anonymous, who went by the name Surge. The intel they provided was like the Rosetta Stone for this whole thing. It connected all these technical blunders to a deliberate political motive.
You know, every investigation has that breakthrough moment, right? The point where all the suspicion turns into certainty. For the DOGE initiative, it was a single, devastating mistake.
So get this, an OPM contractor, going by the username JMCooper176, posted the OGTM's entire development toolkit to a public GitHub repository. This is pretty much the digital version of a bank robber leaving the blueprints for the vault on a park bench for everyone to see.
An official incident report didn't mince words. They called it a textbook OPSEC failure and said it posed a material risk to operational security. So this wasn't a minor slip-up. We're talking about a 5-alarm fire.
The leak had everything. I mean everything. Internal maps of their infrastructure, the actual scripts they used to automate their cloud systems, and a ton of sensitive organizational data. It was literally a complete roadmap of the team's tools, their identities, and how they worked, just handed to the world on a silver platter.
But there's a human story in here too. The report says that the contractor, John Cooper, later reached out to a group that was suing the administration, complaining that he was being made a scapegoat. It really hints at just how chaotic and high pressure the environment was inside the DOGE initiative. So, with all the technical failures laid bare, the investigation started turning to the bigger question. What was this all for? What was the DOGE initiative's ultimate goal?
What the report uncovers is this pretty chilling 5-step blueprint for basically dismantling federal agencies from the inside. It starts with a lie, coming in under the banner of IT modernization. Then you get a signed agreement. Then you reveal the true purpose, getting rid of all the staff. Then come the threats to force everyone to comply. And finally, you install your own loyalists to finish the takeover. According to the source, this exact playbook was run at the U.S. African Development Foundation.
Now, to avoid leaving a trail, the operatives used this really clever tactic. Many of them would log into federal systems under one single identity. Amy Gleason, the head of the whole initiative. The report calls this an accountability sinkhole. It made it nearly impossible to trace who was actually deleting data or making these huge changes.
Eventually, though, the legal system started to catch up. As more and more lawsuits were filed, federal courts began to weigh in, And they described the administration's actions in some really scathing terms, like arbitrary and capricious, and a gross departure from their legal duties.
And that leads us to the final chapter in this story, the legal fallout, and the battle for accountability that played out in the courts.
Court documents revealed this profound, just total disregard for basic security. You had a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old who were given administrative access to OPM's most sensitive systems in late January. The problem? They didn't finish their mandatory cybersecurity training until February 19th, weeks later.
And it wasn't just an isolated incident. The court findings show a really clear pattern. Across multiple operatives, access was granted way before training was completed. And for several key people, there was no record of them ever completing it.
The legal conclusion was unambiguous. OPM had broken the law on multiple counts. The courts found it had illegally disclosed records just by granting these people access, that it had failed in its duty to safeguard data, and that its actions were arbitrary and capricious, which is a serious violation of the Administrative Procedure Act.
In its final verdict, the court really just condemned the entire operation. It found the onboarding process for these operatives was chaotic, irregular, and risky, and called it nothing less than a fundamental failure of culture and leadership.
Ultimately, the source material paints a really chilling picture of what happens when that move fast and break things ethos from the tech world gets applied to the core functions of government, bypassing all the rules meant to ensure security and accountability. And that leaves us with one final, provocative question. What happens when government moves at the speed of a startup?